Okay, good evening, everyone. We're about to get started. For anybody who's joining over Zoom, please know that the source sheets, the Mara Makomos, are available in the chat, so you can access them there. And again, I thank everybody for joining us in person and virtually tonight. As always, I want to thank our series sponsors. Our series is sponsored by Jennifer and David Miller in memory of Rachel Shoretz Aleha Hashalom Zichron Lebracha. And our learning should certainly be as close for her neshama. I also just want to briefly mention that I noticed that today marked the yard site of Joseph Appel, of Joe Appel, who I never got a chance to meet, but I know many of you certainly did. And from what I understand, was really a pillar of communal activity in our shul, a founding member of the Chevra Kadisha, and did a lot of other great things for our Kehillah. So our learning tonight should be in zechus of Joe as well. Our final installment of our series on the Aseret HaDibrot, on the fourth of the Aseret HaDibrot, is what I entitled Making Shabbos Meaningful for Our Kids and for Adults Too. And that's precisely what I want to talk about. We discussed a lot of theory about Shabbos. We discussed the mitzvah aseh of Shabbos and the conceptual nature of that mitzvah. We discussed practical applications of that mitzvah aseh of Shabbos. We've noted that part of the mitzvah of Shabbos is not just to desist from 39 different prohibited things, but it is facilitate an environment that is an environment of Shabbos, of Shabboson, of rest, of spiritually uplifting character. But then the question becomes, how exactly do we do that? And it is quite a challenge. I've mentioned a lot in the past, many of you, well, all of you, if you've been here for a bar mitzvah, you'll know that I often sit down with bar mitzvah boys, with bat mitzvah girls before their 13th or 12th birthday, respectively. And I ask them a whole host of questions, lots of silly questions, lots of serious questions. It's a way to get them to think, for me to get to know them, to forge the basis of a relationship, the foundation for a relationship. I often speak about them, whether it be in shul, on the morning of a Kriyas HaTorah, or at a bat mitzvah celebration. I'll speak about a young man or young woman and their admirable qualities. But it also just gives you data. When you sit down and you talk to lots of 13-year-old boys, lots of 12-year-old girls, and you ask them all sorts of different questions, over time, certain patterns emerge, and you notice certain things about how our youth, how our adolescents are perceiving things. And one of the questions that I always ask, or I guess two of the questions that I always ask in every single interview, sometimes I alternate the questions, but there's certain standard questions that I ask every time. I will always ask every young man and young woman, what is your favorite part about Judaism? What's the best part about Torah life? And I will always ask them, what is the hardest part about Judaism? What's the hardest part about being a Jew? When it comes to that latter question, again, there are certain patterns that emerge. The number one answer from bar mitzvah boys and bat mitzvah girls about the hardest part about Judaism, anyone care to guess? Not Shabbat. Well, that's obviously where we're going with this, but that's not the number one answer. You know what the number one answer is? Fasting. Fasting is the number one answer that I get from bar mitzvah boys and bat mitzvah girls. For them, the concept of like not eating for 25 hours really looms large and it scares them. They don't realize that it's not the biggest deal for many of us. Again, for some people, fasting is a very big deal. And those are the shilas that I get before Yom Kippur and Tisha B'Av. But that's the number one answer. That's the most common answer that I get. But another answer that I will not infrequently get is Shabbos. Shabbos is really hard for kids nowadays, especially in the technological age that we live in. At that age, when for many kids, technology is kind of just a part of how they grew up and is a part of their lives, that's a whole separate conversation about what we could do to potentially change that and to make sure that that doesn't become a fixture, an essential fixture of their lives. But for many teens for whom this is a reality, it is very, very hard to just desist from that every week for 25 hours and just to observe Shabbos. So one of the answers that I get is Shabbos. Shabbos is very hard. And whenever I do get that answer, I always have the same standard response. I tell this to every young man and young woman, and I think the overwhelming majority of them intuitively know this and appreciate that it is explicated and pointed out. I will tell them, I hear you. At this stage in your life, Shabbos can be very hard. But I assure you, mark my words. You could say that you heard it from Rabbi Schrier first. You will reach a point in your life when you realize that Shabbos is the greatest gift that Torah has to offer. You will come to appreciate just how amazing and beautiful Shabbos is. And the very precise features that you find so difficult now, turning off technology and the like, are the features that you will appreciate the most about Shabbos at some stage and at some point in your life. And again, I think it could be that they're just flattering the rabbi, but most of these kids don't flatter the rabbi, trust me. So I think when they nod and they understand intuitively that at a future stage, they might appreciate Shabbos more, even as they don't necessarily now. But of course, for those of us who are parents, and frankly, even for those of us who are adults who are seeking to enhance our own Shabbos, it is worthwhile to think about what can make Shabbos meaningful. And tonight, I want to offer 7 pieces of advice I figured 7 is an appropriate number in a series on Shabbos. You can consider 1 for each day of the week. 7 pieces of advice for Shabbos and how we can make it meaningful for ourselves and for our children. I will preface this by saying, I don't preach this from on high as a perfect practitioner of this. This is a struggle that every parent deals with and that every individual deals with. And I'll be very open with you about certain cases where I think I'll give myself a pat on the back, certain areas where I think Rena and I do certain things well, and other areas where we really do not and can work. And all of us, I think, have work to do on these areas. But here are just, again, 7 things that I think are worth considering and thinking about as we approach our Shabbos and seek to make it as meaningful as possible. The first piece of advice, and I'll also preface this by saying many of these are rather intuitive. I'm not here to be machadesh chidushim. Many of these make a lot of sense, but sometimes it is worth just having reminders to perhaps revisit them and to engage. First piece of advice is prepare. Prepare for Shabbos. If you want to make Shabbos meaningful, don't just walk into Shabbos, light the candle, sit down at the Shabbos table, and then start thinking, oh, how am I going to make this meaningful for my children? How am I going to make this Shabbos Seudah that I just started? Don't sit down after Motzi and say, oh, now what am I going to do? Now what am I going to say? Now how am I going to engage my children? If you start thinking about those questions at that point, it's already too late. Prepare in advance. We started, the source that we've started with in each and every Schrier in this series is source number 1, Zachor es Yom HaShabbos, the Kaddish. Remember the Shabbos day in order to sanctify it. And the Ramban, commenting on that pasuk, says, Yal derech hapshat amru, he quotes the Mechilta, which we'll see in just a moment at source number 3, She mitzvah in bold, She nizkor tamid b'chol yom, es ha-Shabbos, sholo nishkachehu. The mitzvah of Zachor es Yom HaShabbos, the Kaddish, the mitzvah that we've been studying in this series, says the Ramban, is not really a mitzvah on Shabbos. You know what Zachor es Yom HaShabbos, the Kaddish, tells you? Every single day, remember the Shabbos. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Shabbos should always be on your mind. You should live with a perpetual Shabbos awareness. When you constantly remember Shabbos, then you will always remember that which Shabbos represents, the broad theological themes that Shabbos represents, the creation of the universe, etc. It will always be on your mind. Etc., etc. You will always know 7 days a week that the earth has a creator. All that Shabbos represents should permeate the entirety of the week. And as the Ramban noted, this is based on a Mechilta in source number 3 that says that the Tanaim would prepare for Shabbos throughout the week. Source number 3. Shammai Hazakin Omer. Shammai Hazakin says, Zokra ad shelo tavo, v'shomra misha tavo. At the very outset, we noted that, of course, there are famously 2 different formulations of this mitzvah in the Torah. Zokra es Yom HaShabbos l'kadsho, Shomra es Yom HaShabbos l'kadsho. One in Parshas Yisro, another in Parshas Vayeschanan. So how did Shammai reconcile the 2? He said Zokra is before Shabbos begins. Shomra is once Shabbos has begun. And the Mechilta comments, Amru ala Shammai Hazakin. And they said about Shammai Hazakin, this wasn't just something that he preached, it was very much something that he practiced as well. Shlo haya zikaron Shabbos zaz mitov piv, lo kach chefetz tov omer zel Shabbos, fi chadash omer zel Shabbos. Shammai was always preparing for Shabbos. Whenever he purchased something new, whenever he purchased something nice, the first thing that he would declare is, this is for Shabbos usage. He was always thinking about, how can I properly prepare for Shabbos? The third line of source number 3, Zachor Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira Omer. Yehuda ben Beseira would do this in a different way. Minayin shekesha'ata mona, have a mona echad b'Shabbos, b'sheni b'Shabbos, shlishi b'Shabbos, revi'i b'Shabbos, chamishi b'Shabbos, erev Shabbos, tamud loma Zachor. What does Zachor mean? When you count the days of the week, don't affix monikers to the days of the week, the way we do in English, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. In Hebrew, there will be no names for the days of the week. How will you count them? Yom Rishon l'Shabbos, Yom Sheni l'Shabbos, Yom Shlishi l'Shabbos. You'll always be counting towards Shabbos. Shabbos needs to be something that you prepare for. And in the context of making Shabbos meaningful, I think that is critical as well. This past Shabbos HaGadol, I actually quoted these first 3 sources because the Rambam compares Zechiras Shabbos to Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim. And I was arguing at the time that there is a lot that we can learn about Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim from the comparison to Shabbos. But for tonight, allow me to invert the comparison for a moment. I think there is a lot that we can learn about Shabbos from the comparison to Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim. Whenever I give a shiur in advance of the Seder, I'm sure some of you have heard me say this in the past, I will frequently preface it by saying the following. When you sit down to conduct your Seder, you are forging some of the most lasting memories that your children, that your grandchildren, that other family members, that they will have of you on that night of the Seder. There are lots of times when we interact with, again, children, grandchildren, other special people in our lives, and we don't necessarily know which moments are going to be the ones that stick, which ones are going to be the moments that they remember for perpetuity. We don't always know when that's going to happen. Sometimes it's moments that we least expect that have that lasting impact. But there are other times when you know this is going to be one of the moments that will be remembered. And the night of the Seder is perhaps the most poignant example of that. How many of us have memories of the Seder from our childhood, from different stages of our lives, from the people, of memories of the people that sat around our Seder table and what they would tell at the Seder table, the jokes they would tell, the Divrei Torah they would share. That forms the memories that we have of many significant people in our lives. And I always point out that when you think about the Seder in that context, in some ways it's daunting. There's pressure when you know that night is invested with so much meaning and so much lasting memory, but there's also immense opportunity in that as well. And when you understand that about the Seder, what do? You prepare for the Seder. If you know in advance that it is going to create lasting memories, it behooves you to properly prepare in advance to make sure that you're able to conduct your Seder as best you possibly can. While that is perhaps most dramatic in terms of the Seder, because it is one night a year, or here in Chutz La'aretz it is 2 nights a year, a similar thing can be said about Shabbos. How many of our memories of significant people in our lives are forged around the Shabbos table? And I think for many of us, there are many fundamental and core memories of others that are forged around the Shabbos table. The family experience, the whole unit of the family, is perhaps most acutely expressed around a Shabbos table. So if that's the case, then it behooves you to prepare and think about what the Shabbos table should look like, what you want it to look like, what it is going to be. And we'll talk about different components of that in a moment, but I'll just note in advance that it applies to different parts of Shabbos also. I said a moment ago, I would speak personally. So in my case, I will say that, Baruch Hashem, I think there are certain parts of Shabbos that we do pretty well. Our Friday night Seudah, we have a certain formula that we've worked on over time. It's not something that just happened by itself. We've really thought carefully about what we want to do and how things work. And we really actually have a formula that seems to work for our children at this stage in our lives. And I will emphasize in just a moment, these things obviously adapt over time at different stages of life, and who's around your Shabbos table and the like. But it works well. We go through everyone's week. Everyone tells the best part of their week and the hardest part of their week. We go through all the kids' different parsha sheets. There's certain zmiros that we sing that we'll talk about in just a moment. The Friday night Seder, if you will, is pretty fixed and established. We do Motzei Shabbos pretty well also. When it comes to Motzei Shabbos, it's a very tricky issue nowadays, especially with children, because there's sometimes, unfortunately, in line with the themes that we've just discussed, there's like an excitement when Shabbos is over, because that's the moment when the Muktzah items are online, and now I can play with my toy, my truck that makes noise, and there's always that opportunity to get back to the things that were restricted on Shabbos. So Motzei Shabbos can be tricky. So in my household, we make Motzei Shabbos really exciting, but not for the reasons of Shabbos is over, getting back to the toys. We sing zmiros. I'm like literally chucking my kids up in the air. It is the most exhausting experience of my week, Motzei Shabbos, but they look forward to it. And again, not just because they want to get back to their toys, because they know we sing Eliyahu Navi, and we sing Amavdu Ben Kodesh L'Chol, and Save, and we sing all these songs, and we dance together. It's this whole experience of escorting the Shabbos Malka out. But again, that doesn't happen on its own. It's because it's very carefully choreographed. My kids don't know that, but it's very carefully choreographed in advance. There are other areas that I'm still working on. Shabbos afternoons are very, very difficult for me. If I want to give myself an excuse, it's because as a rabbi, Shabbos afternoons are most unpredictable. You never know what's going to happen when you're going to be at a simcha, or at a kiddush, or multiple kiddushes and the like. But it's something that I'm still working on. And I don't have the formula yet. And I'm still working on it. And I'm still thinking about it. And constantly I'm thinking about, oh, maybe we could tweak this. Maybe we can move that around. Maybe we could sing this. Maybe we could share that. It's something that is constantly on my mind. But the key thing is it needs to be on our minds. We need to be constantly preparing for how we can make Shabbos most meaningful. And we need to be ready to tweak our plans and to improve our plans and to constantly improve as best we can. If you want to make Shabbos meaningful, you can't just show up on Shabbos and hope that it's meaningful. There needs to be advanced preparation and forethought. So that is piece of advice number one. Piece of advice number two is the counter to that, which is as much as you prepare, you also need to be ready to adapt. Sometimes you prepare for Shabbos and you have this image in your head of this postcard perfect family where everyone is sitting nicely around the table, looking up, eagerly thirsting for the words of a Dvar Torah that someone is giving, and they're perfectly behaving and eating all of their food nicely, and everybody's perfect around the table. That is what Shabbos should be. And then you get to your Shabbos table, and this one is screaming at that one, and this one is crying because he had slightly less soup than the other one, and this one is measuring the amount of soda that each one got, and it just becomes a catastrophe, and you give up, and you say, oh, so my Shabbos table is never going to be that Shabbos table. I'm going to clue you into something. Moshe Rabbeinu's Shabbos table was not that Shabbos table. No one's Shabbos table looks like that postcard perfect image. Maybe once a year you get a Shabbos that actually looks like that. But far more often than not, it's not going to be a perfect Shabbos. Last week, I was at the annual RCA convention, which was actually really, really nice this year. It was really, really nicely done. And one of the speakers they brought in was Rav Daniel Kalish, who is the Menahel of the Waterbury Mesivta. And he was talking about a Shabbos that he put together. I think it was in Yerushalayim, Yer HaKodesh. I don't remember exactly all the details. But he puts together this one Shabbos where lots of the parents, i.e. lots of the donors, come to watch the Shabbos experience, to get a sense of what the Mesivta is doing, what the yeshiva is doing with all of their Talmidim. And it's always a really special Shabbos. And he says the highlight is Shalosh Shabbos. Everyone is singing these slow, soulful zmiros. Everyone is getting really into the Shabbos experience. Everyone is feeling very spiritual. And it's a very important moment. He gives a Dvar Torah, and the boys thirst for that Dvar Torah. It's always like a very inspiring moment. He said one year, there was one boy who was having some issues. And the way he was frequently experiencing or expressing them was he would become very argumentative. He would very frequently argue with his friends or fight with his friends and the like. And he remembered thinking he was just hoping that this boy would behave himself at this Shalosh Shabbos because, again, it was showcasing the yeshiva. It was an important moment for him, for his institution and the like. And he said it didn't go that way. And he saw it happening almost like in slow motion. The boy started arguing, who knows what it was about, with the person next to him. And it started escalating and it started getting worse. And he's just hoping that it didn't happen. And at a certain point, he realized, you know what? This is what it is. This is who we are. We're not going to try to be anyone we're not. We're not going to try to sugarcoat things. Like, let them see, honestly, what our yeshiva is about. And they had the Shalosh Shabbos, and it went beautifully. And this boy ended up fighting with somebody else at the same time. And he said repeatedly over and over again, that boy made the Shalosh Shabbos experience for everyone who was there. Because that's when they realized this isn't some like choreographed show. This isn't some play or some kind of performance that they're putting on for the sake of looking good in front of everybody else. This is who they are. The good, the bad, and the ugly. You're seeing everything. This is the Shabbos experience. And no, it's not a perfect postcard because nobody has a perfect postcard every single Shabbos. But there can be beauty in Shabbos nonetheless. Even as you prepare, also be prepared to go off script. Also recognize that you can't just, again, create Yesh Me'ayin, the perfect Shabbos. Only HaKadosh Baruch Hu was able to do that. And he did so, in the primordial beginning of the universe. For the rest of us, we prepare as best we can, but we also need to recognize that even the best laid plans don't always play out perfectly, and we need to be willing to adapt as well. That's piece number 2. Now, as an intro to pieces 4, 5, and 6, I want to take a look at the Rambam in source number 4. My next 3 pieces of advice are what I will call make it enjoyable, make it meaningful, and meet them at their level. And I think all 3 of them emerge from a passage in the Rambam in source number 4, which is actually a passage from the Rambam in Hilchos Yom Tov, not in Hilchos Shabbos. But as we'll see in just a moment, the Rambam certainly relates his analysis to Shabbos as well. He almost prefaces it by saying that the analysis that we will give about Yom Tov is almost derived from Shabbos. Source number 4. Rambam in Yom Tov Perek Vav, Halachot Zayin says as follows: Kishem shem mitzvah lecha beit Shabbos u'leonga, kach kol yomim tovim. Just like there's a mitzvah of kavod Shabbos, to honor the Shabbos, and a mitzvah of oneg Shabbos, which is a mitzvah to enjoy Shabbos, so too there is a mitzvah by yomim tovim as well. So even though he's talking about Yom Tov, he prefaces it by saying, just like this is a mitzvah on Shabbos, it's a mitzvah on Yom Tov too, clearly indicating that the analysis seems to apply to Shabbos also. He quotes a very important pasuk in Sefer Yeshaya. It appears in source number 6. Shenemar lekdosh Hashem mechubad. So he says, look, it applies to Shabbos, it applies to Yom Tov too. That's the end of the first bold line in source number 4. Don't have a huge meal right before Shabbos, right before Yom Tov, because then you're not going to have an appetite for the Shabbos or Yom Tov meal. And he says treating Yom Tov properly is very significant. It's very important. If you don't do so, it's compared to Avodah Zarah. Fine. That's the first paragraph, the first halach of source number 4. Halacha Yud Zayin. Shiva Yimei HaPesach, U'shmonos Yimei HaChag, Im Sh'ar Yomim Tovim, Kulam Asurim V'Hesped V'Tainis. 7 days of Pesach, the 8 days of Chag, the other Yomim Tovim, which of course Shavuos, which is upon us in just 6 days' time. They're all prohibited in Hesped V'Tainis. There's a mitzvah to be happy on Yom Tov. So we don't eulogize on Yom Tov. We don't fast on Yom Tov. We try to maintain a festive atmosphere. A person is obligated to be festive, to be happy, to be joyous on Yom Tov. You need to make sure that everyone in your household is properly enjoying Shabbos. Second bold line of source number 4. Says, even though really, technically speaking, the mitzvah of Simchas Yom Tov, back in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, was to bring a special karban called the karban Shalmei Simcha. It was a karban Shlomim. You'd eat from that karban Shlomim. That is how you would fulfill the mitzvah of Simcha in the days of old. As I explained, says the Rambam in Hilchos Chagiga, Yesh bechlal osa Simcha l'smalach hu uvanav uvnei beiso kol echad ve'echad karoi. Nowadays, we don't have this karban anymore, but you know what you still need to do? You still need to make sure that Shabbos is festive, that it's joyous for every member of your household. Kol echad ve'echad karoi lo, each in a way appropriate for them. A line that we'll also highlight. Third paragraph, final paragraph of source number 4, before we break down all of this. Halacha Yud Ches. Ketzad, how do you do this? Hakatanim nosin lahem kloyos ve'agozim u'migdanos. He says to children, do what makes them happy. What do? Give them treats. Give them treats. Now, back in the days, apparently, like nuts were treats to kids. Nowadays, they need a lot more sugar content in order to make them happy. But the basic principle is the same. Give them treats. As for women, make sure that they're provided with nice clothing. This is based on the Gemara in Pesachim Daf Kuftas that says that's what makes women happy. And he says the men should eat basar, they should eat meat, and they should drink wine. And then bold. So the Rambam first says, provide for everyone in accordance with what will make them happy. And then final bold line of source number 4. When you eat and drink, this is a famous line in the Rambam. Make sure that you're not just filling your own stomach when you eat and drink over the course of Shabbos, but make sure you are also providing for the ger, the yasom, the almanah, the widow, the orphan, the proselyte, and anyone who is destitute. Kol ha'aniyim ha'amlolim, anyone who can't provide for themselves. And the Rambam has very harsh words for those who fail to do this. Aval misha noel delasos chatzera, one who locks the doors of his personal courtyard, not allowing the destitute in. But ochel v'shosa hu uvanu ve'ishta, and he has a festive meal for himself, for his family. Ve'eno ma'achil u'mashke la'aniyim u'lamari nefesh, and you refuse to provide for others. You don't give to the poor, to the destitute, to those who can use some help on Shabbos. Says the Rambam, Ein zo simchas mitzvah, ala simchas kreisa. This is not the joy of a mitzvah. It's the joy of your stomach, says the Rambam. That is gluttonous behavior. Don't think that's meritorious conduct. Don't say l'chavod Shabbos kodesh and pretend you're engaged in such a pious and meritorious mitzvah when you're really just stuffing your face and you're refusing to provide for others. That's not simchas mitzvah, says the Rambam. That's simchas kreisa. And again, he continues to have harsh words for those who fail to provide for others. So again, harsh words from the Navi Malachi about people who fail to provide for others. Says the Rambam, others need to be provided for as well. And just again, one final source number 5, before we just unpack all of this. The Rambam presents oneg and kavod Shabbos, honoring Shabbos, kavod and oneg Shabbos, honoring Shabbos and enjoying Shabbos jointly in Shabbos Perek Lamed. He does not present them as 2 separate principles. We have one parak on kavod Shabbos, one parak on honoring Shabbos, and another parak on enjoying Shabbos. He combines them both into a single parak, and the halacha seems to indeed indicate that there is an interface between the two. The respect and honor that we have for Shabbos, what I'm calling making Shabbos meaningful, is inherently linked to making Shabbos enjoyable. Kavod and oneg are linked. So let's go back to our practical questions of how can we make Shabbos meaningful. Number one, like I said, so we said prepare, we said two, adapt. Number three, seek to make Shabbos enjoyable. Shabbos is supposed to be enjoyed. Physical indulgence is part of the spiritual experience. That might sound like a Hasidic idea, and certainly Hasidim took that idea and leaned into it significantly. The idea that, again, you can be makadesh, one's nefesh, through indulgence of the guf as well, that through physical indulgence, you can engage in spiritual elevation too. But it's not new to Hasidus. Again, it goes back to Chazal. The whole idea of Oneg Shabbos dictates that through the enjoyment of Shabbos, in the most material sense, can be part of the spiritual elevation of Shabbos. And I would argue that principle, particularly for children, for teens, for those who are growing up in today's day and age, is even more critical than it ever was. Shabbos was always supposed to be an enjoyable day. But you know what? As far as I can tell, again, maybe historians will tell me I'm wrong. I don't think Shabbos ever started at a deficit beyond any other day of the week. You had 7 days a week. They're all on equal footing. And the mitzvah was to make Shabbos more enjoyable than the other days of the week. That was the mitzvah in the days of old, in previous ages. Nowadays, unfortunately, Shabbos starts from behind. I can't play with that truck that makes all the noise. Or for a teen, I can't go on social media and talk to my friends or access any of the games that I'm ordinarily playing and the like. Shabbos starts from behind. So as much as it was important to make Shabbos enjoyable in the past, all the more so, it's critical that we invest in just the pure enjoyment of Shabbos. On again, like forget about Divrei Torah and Zmiros, we'll get to all of that stuff, that's all wonderful. But just the experience of Shabbos, we just need to find practical ways to make it more enjoyable. At the stage of life that I'm in, I very much lean into the Rambam's Kolayos Ve'egozim. There's it's a nonstop sugar high when Shabbos begins, because again, I want Shabbos to be sweet. So we don't limit treats on Shabbos. We very carefully limit it the other days of the week. Shabbos, anything flies. I hope Hashem will protect my children's teeth. And my mother happens to be their dentist. So again, my mother should forgive me for that. But that's a way that we try to compensate for the technology deficit over the course of Shabbos. At different points in kids' lives that might manifest in different ways. Sometimes, again, we'll talk about this more as well. Sometimes it may just be through our presence, making sure that we're spending time with kids, doing the things that they enjoy doing. No, you can't use the toys that make noise. No, you can't use a screen on Shabbos. But maybe there are other ways that we can seek to be proactive in finding things that our children enjoy. If there's a game that they enjoy, if there's something they enjoy doing, there's an activity that they enjoy, let us make sure that we're leaning into it to try to make sure that there are positive experiences of Shabbos. Here, it's almost impossible not to quote the famous line from Moshe Feinstein, who said that he really disliked the old expression that it is difficult to be a Jew. Schwer zu sein a Yid is what people would say. And it's true. Sometimes it is very difficult, particularly for a generation for whom Shabbos was very difficult because they would lose their job every single Sunday when they didn't show up to work on Saturday and had to scrounge around for a new parnasa every single week. It was very, very challenging. But Moshe said, if you come home and just express how difficult it is to be a Jew every single week, if you just express how difficult Shabbos is every single week, if your kids have exposure to the difficulty of Shabbos, and even the heroic sacrifice that you make, but you only express it in the terms of how difficult it is to do, then why are they going to be ever enticed to observe Shabbos on their own? Moshe said, you should say it's geschmack zu sein a Yid. It's sweet to be a Jew. That's also true. They're not mutually exclusive. But Moshe would say, at least in the presence of your children, you want to highlight the latter so that they experience Shabbos as something enjoyable and have positive associations with it. So number 3, make Shabbos enjoyable. And that leads directly into number 4, which is make Shabbos meaningful. To me, making Shabbos meaningful, and again, I think this emerges from the words of the Rambam as well, is intertwined with making it enjoyable. If the Divrei Torah that you're offering, if the Zmiros that you're singing, if all of that is met with just a groan and an eye roll, then that's not going to succeed in making Shabbos meaningful. It needs to be intertwined with the enjoyable features of Shabbos. If Shabbos is not enjoyable, it will never be meaningful. So the enjoyable feature enhances the meaningful feature. But I think it works the other way as well. As the Rambam said, true simcha is simcha that comes from meaning. Yes, there is undoubtedly physical pleasure and indulgence in having a nice meal, having a good cholent, having a fine wine over the course of Shabbos. But if you want that fleeting physical indulgence to turn into something much more lasting, a genuine happiness, like we said before, something that becomes a memory that lasts a lifetime, it needs to be infused with some form of meaning. The meaning enhances the enjoyment just as the enjoyment enhances the meaningful character of Shabbos. And I think that's true in life experience as well. When we think back to our fondest memories or the things that are the experiences that are most formative and powerful in our lives, they aren't moments when we just happen to enjoy ourselves. It wasn't a moment when we had so much fun. It was wonderful. There might be good associations or positive memories of those things. But at least for me, and I assume for many of you as well, the most powerful memories that we think back on in our lives are ones that weren't just enjoyable, but also were infused with meaning, that had purpose, that clearly connected us to something larger than ourselves, that connected us to something that is greater than just the moments themselves that we remember. Those are the moments that are most enjoyable too, because of the meaning that's imbued with them. So in addition to making Shabbos enjoyable, we need to make it meaningful too. Now, how do we do both of those things? And here's where piece number 5 comes in. And I think this is really the one that rounds out both of the previous ones, how we make it enjoyable and how we make it meaningful. You need to meet them at their level. If you're trying to make Shabbos meaningful or enjoyable for someone, you can't just impose what you think is nice. You need to make sure that you meet them where they are at. Going back to the words of the Rambam in Hilchos Yom Tov, the Rambam said that you need to meet Banav uvnei Veso kol echad ve'echad kara'ui lo. Think about what each person appreciates and plan from there. And that applies to both the enjoyment of Shabbos and the meaning of Shabbos. When it comes to the enjoyment of Shabbos, I said a moment ago, for young kids, you want to find what makes them enjoy Shabbos. So again, for them, it's often Candyman and Shul, and it's often sweets. The Kalayos Egozim, the principle that the Rambam outlined in the days of old, continues to apply today. That's a way to make it meaningful. As kids age and get older, their tastes change. The Rambam says that for adults, having nice food on Shabbos, having special food on Shabbos that may not be sweets or candy, but something that we appreciate, whatever that may be, is a way to enhance appreciation and enjoyment of Shabbos. And in addition to the physical components, I alluded to this before, but I re-emphasize it now, the time that is spent together cannot be underestimated. It is always tempting to just chap a nap on Shabbos afternoon. There are sources for that. It's praiseworthy to sleep on Shabbos. Trust me, as someone who works on Shabbos, I get the appeal of a nap on Shabbos afternoon. But when you're dealing with kids in particular, you just wasted such a valuable opportunity for meaningful engagement to make Shabbos enjoyable for them. You might enjoy that nap on Shabbos afternoon. Your kids are not going to enjoy that nap on Shabbos afternoon. For them, it is an opportunity to spend time with you. And here is a chiddush perhaps, but it is true. That is not only true of young children, that is true of teens as well. They may make it out as if they don't want to spend time with their parents or their grandparents. They might make it out as if they only want to spend time with their friends because they're too cool for school. But study after study shows they want their parents to be there. Maybe not hovering over them, but to have the opportunity to engage in a meaningful way on their terms over the course of a Shabbos afternoon. That is formative and meaningful for them as well. So whatever stage they're at, find a way to create enjoyment of Shabbos and make Shabbos enjoyable for them. And perhaps even more importantly, that's true of the meaningful components of Shabbos. I think one of the classic mistakes, one of the most prevalent mistakes that parents and grandparents can make around the Shabbos table is trying to impose meaningfulness upon kids as opposed to recognizing what is meaningful to them. And that manifests in terms of every component of what makes Shabbos meaningful. Let's start with Divrei Torah. From my standpoint, the Shabbos table, again, depending on who your audience is, but from my standpoint, at least I'll talk about myself at my current stage. The Shabbos table is not my opportunity to offer the really super sophisticated, nuanced mahalach on the parsha that I heard from Rosh Soloveitchik the other day. Like, that's not the time for it. That's not where my family is at right now. And frankly, it's not where my family will be for many, many years from now. I can share all of that with you on the Shabbos morning drasha or the Shabbos afternoon shir. There are opportunities for that. But the Dvar Torah that I share at the Shabbos table is short, sweet, simple, and basic. This week, we are starting Sefer Bamidbar, which Hashem counts us so many times. Why does Hashem count us so many times? Well, Hashem knows. Why does he need to count us so many times? Let me tell you what Rashi says. Rashi says it's because when you really love something, you count it. What do you guys do with your baseball cards? Every day, we're going through those baseball cards over and over and over again, turning the pages of the album because it's cool, because it's awesome, because you love it. You know what? Hashem loves us. Hashem loves us. And even though he knows exactly how many Jews there are, he counts us again and again. Because he loves each and every one of us. It's a Rashi. I didn't engage in any fancy drush here. I didn't engage in anything sophisticated or complex. And the message is the most basic message we can communicate. What is the message? Hashem loves you. But you know what? That is going to succeed far more, again, at least at my Shabbos table, than the fancy Mahalach or the Lumdus and the Rambam about Tzvei Dinim and the Isser of Sfiras B'nai Yisrael, and why you have to count indirectly via a Chatzi Shekel instead. Give a Dvar Torah that resonates. When you're dealing with others of a different age group, let's say you're dealing with teenagers, I find, again, I don't have teenagers of my own, but I spent much time educating teenagers in the classroom. Pose questions to them. Don't tell them what the Parsha says. Ask them, what are your thoughts on this part of the Torah? You're starting to think about things. What do you think? Like, what is it about this counting, this repetitive counting? Why is it so important? Why does Hashem divide us into different tribes? Why is it so important to count us as members of tribes as opposed to just counting us as one people? As opposed to just counting us as Am Yisrael? Why the division? Don't we value unity? Why are we divided into 12 groups rather than just being counted as a single nation? I can give you a lot of different mahalchim on that, but instead of me just telling you the answer, why not engage others? For adults, that could work as well. You need to know who your audience is. You need to know who's sitting around the Shabbos table, but make sure that the Divrei Torah are catered to them. It's true of Zmiros. The thing that determines which Zmiros I personally will sing at any given Shabbos meal is purely what Zemer my kids happen to be into at any given moment. On Friday nights, nowadays, our staple is Ma'adidos. That is their favorite Zemer on Friday night. It's very exciting. There's a lot of action going on in Ma'adidos. So that becomes their favorite Friday night Zemer. On Shabbos day, my middle one, Zakaria, loves Yom Shabbos on. So we always sing Yom Shabbos on. And every Shabbos meal, there is one Zemer that is Kodesh HaKadoshim. Doesn't matter, Shabbos evening, Shabbos day. We sing it every single meal. And what is that? Put the chicken in the pot. Stir it up nice and hot. Get it ready for Shabbat, That happens to be the favorite song of my 4-year-old. He loves that song. He sings it in school. And we go around the table. Each person has to put a different ingredient into the pot. He has veto powers over which ingredients are accepted. We end up with some very exotic recipes sometimes for the soup for Shabbos, but that is sung every single time. Last year, he would take the entire Motor Randy playlist, and that's what we would sing at every Shabbos meal. We would sing bim bum bim 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 bum Shabbat Shalom. That's what the flying Shabbos kugel eater or something like giant Shabbos kugel eater. There's this whole repertoire that he would sing in school, and that's what we would sing at the Shabbos table, because that's what got him excited about Shabbos. Were those my favorite Shabbos miros? Not necessarily, but if that's what's getting them excited, then that's what we should be excited about as well. It applies to Divrei Torah, it applies to Zmiros, and it applies to other meaningful components of Shabbos too. Shabbos is a great opportunity to do chesed because of the meaningful components of Shabbos. Exactly as the Rambam said, when we engage in our indulgence of Shabbos, we need to make sure that others are included too. But it should be done in a careful, calibrated way. When I was in Einstein, there used to be a group that would do Bikur Cholim every Shabbos afternoon. We were located near a number of hospitals, naturally, because again, we're part of a medical school, so there were a number of hospitals nearby. And I was part of a group that we would go just to visit the hospitals and visit some of the patients that were in the hospital over the course of Shabbos afternoon. And when my son, my oldest, was very, very little, I said, what an amazing chinuch opportunity. I'm going to take him with me. We're going to visit people on Shabbos afternoon. And we'll show him that Shabbos is not just about sitting around our table. We'll show him exactly what the Rambam says here. Shabbos is about caring for others. It's about doing chesed. It's about doing mitzvos. Amazing. I'm going to put him in the stroller. I'm going to take him to the hospital. So I did it one time. And he was freaked out beyond his mind. It was like the scariest experience for him. He had never seen a hospital before. It was like, again, it's not a setting that kids necessarily feel comfortable in. And the next Shabbos, I tried to put him in the stroller, and he started screaming, no bikur cholim, no bikur cholim. And I realized that however noble my intentions were, this was not the right mechanism for doing it. I wasn't meeting my child where he was at. So my wife would take him while I was in the hospital for however long. And that was not the chesed opportunity. That was not the outlet. And Be'ez Hashem will keep an eye open to find other ones. At the same time, I can tell you that for kids in an older demographic, chesed can be an extraordinarily meaningful part of Shabbos. During COVID, a number of teenagers took it upon themselves to visit elderly neighbors who were alone for Shabbos. Again, loneliness was one of the pervasive themes of COVID, especially in those early days when people didn't have the means of interaction that we ordinarily have. You couldn't sit around the Shabbos table together. For a while, we couldn't even see each other in shul. So there are a number of teens in our shul who took upon themselves to visit neighbors. on Shabbos. And that became, again, an extraordinarily formative experience for them. The kesher, the connection that they built between, again, radically different age demographics actually continued well after quarantine was over and people were able to interact on Shabbos, so because it became part of their Shabbos experience. So chesed, done in the right way, can be an extraordinarily powerful way of making Shabbos meaningful. But it all depends on where they are at and meeting them at their level. So yes, make it enjoyable, make it meaningful, but how do you do both? By first knowing where they're at and meeting them at the level that they are at. Piece of advice number 6. I'd say 6 and 7 are probably the most important. But piece of advice number 6 is model it yourself. If you want your children to love Shabbos, you need to feel some kind of love for Shabbos. And if you don't, you can't just lecture them and tell them to love Shabbos. You need to model it for them yourself. Here we come to a source that is not directly on chinuch, but is one of my favorite sources on chinuch, which is the Rambam in Sefer HaMitzvos Aseret. In source number 7, the Rambam says, "Mitzvah shlishis, the third mitzvah in the Torah, hi shetzivanu la'ahavo yis'ala." Here's the mitzvah to love Hashem, the mitzvah of avas Hashem. V'zeh shenisbonin v'naskil mitzvoso tu'uloso v'shenasigeyu v'nisaneg v'hasagaso tachlis hataynu g'zosi ha'ava ha'machuyah. As he says, the Rambam says, and he outlines this in Shodei Torah Parak Beis, the way you achieve avas Hashem is contemplating Hashem, thinking about His mastery, His creation, the wonder of all that Hashem does. And by doing that, you'll have a ta'anug, an oneg, same language that we've used by Shabbos. You'll just be infatuated with Hashem. You'll fall in love with Hashem. And that's how you'll fulfill the mitzvah of Ahavas Hashem. Fine. That's great. That's how the Rambam, again, describes the mitzvah of Ahavas Hashem in other places as well. And you saw the Torah Parak Beis. That's the basic mitzvah. Contemplate Hashem, fall in love with His mastery, with all the amazing things that He does. But the Rambam here goes further. If you skip to the second bold line in source number 7, Ukvar amru shemitzvah zu kolelas gamkein shenidrosh v'nikra ha'anoshim kulam ha'avodaso yis'ala laha'amin ba. True love of Hashem is not just falling in love yourself. True love of Hashem also entails spreading that love to others. Make sure others know about Hashem, believe in Hashem, appreciate Hashem. If you truly love something, it will have a spillover effect to others. It's not just something that you appreciate within Chadrei Hadarim, within the privacy of your own home and nobody else. It's not perceptible to others, and it's not something that you want to spread with others. When you are truly passionate about something, you want others to share your passion, to appreciate what you are passionate about, particularly those who are closest to you. Whatever we're passionate about, we want our children to feel a passion for also. And B, there is just a natural spillover effect. You don't even need to preach to them about how wonderful it is. They perceive your passion and they grow from it in the process. The final bold line of source number 7 says, this was the model of Avraham Avinu. Avraham Avinu discovered God on his own. So he discovered that Avas Hashem through that first line of the Rambam. He contemplated Hashem, he contemplated creation. He came to, according to the Rambam, he had certain cosmological arguments for the existence of God. He came to a philosophical recognition of God all on his own. But that wasn't it. He became infatuated with Hashem. He loved Hashem. And you know what? He didn't just get up and give lectures. He didn't just preach about all the philosophical reasons to believe in God. What did Avraham Avinu do? He welcomed people into his tent. He would have a meal with them. And just the natural passion that he felt for his theological realization, for his mission of ethical monotheism, that had a natural spillover effect to others who were in Avraham Avinu's presence, irrespective of whether he was lecturing them or telling them what to believe. They saw his passion and they clung to it and they drew passion from it themselves. And that's certainly true of all areas of Torah and mitzvahs. If we want our children to love Hashem, we need to find a way to experience that love ourselves. And it's certainly true of Shabbos. If we want our children to appreciate Shabbos, we need to find a love of Shabbos. There's a passage from Rav Soloveitchik that's a really beautiful passage. It's frequently cited as just a really just majestic expression of the beauty of Shabbos and what Shabbos can be. He says in source number 8, not far from where our family lived, there was a majlis or shtibel where I would occasionally go for shalosh hodas. And this is not a philosophical insight of the Rav, it's just a personal reflection. The Hasidim would be singing B'nei Heichala, Hashem Roi Lo Echsar, again B'nei Heichala, again Hashem Roi. It occurred to me that they weren't singing because they wanted to sing. They were singing because they did not want to allow Shabbos to leave. I remember an encounter in the shtiva as a small child. One of the men who had been singing most enthusiastically, wearing a kapata, consisting of more holes than material, so a poor man, approached me and asked if I recognized him. I told him that I did not, and he introduced himself as Yankel the porter. Now, during the week, I knew Yankel the porter as someone very ordinary, wearing shabby clothes, walking around with a rope. I could not imagine that this individual of such regal bearing could be the same person. Yet on Shabbos, he wore a kapata and strima. That is because his soul was not Yankel the porter, but Yankel the prince. Well, after nightfall, I naively asked him, when do we daven Mariv? He replied, do you miss weekdays that much that you cannot wait to daven Mariv? Here was a simple Jew whose entire complexion was transformed by the Shabbos experience, so much so that a young Rav Soloveitchik didn't even recognize him. But you know who I guarantee you did recognize him? I guarantee you that Yankel the porter's own children recognized him on Shabbos as well. And I guarantee you they saw the way he experienced Shabbos, and I'm confident, I don't know who his children were, that they likely experienced Shabbos the same way. When he just felt that transformative power of Shabbos and became almost a different person, that's perceptible to our children too. One of the best ways we can invest in ensuring that future generations appreciate Shabbos is in investing in our own appreciation of Shabbos. And sometimes you can articulate that also. You could tell them, I love Shabbos. You could tell them, I love Shabbos because of the time that I get to spend with you, because of the time that we have to spend together, because of the time that we have to spend with Hashem. You can articulate it also, and sometimes that can be very powerful. But the articulation is only powerful if it's coming from a genuine place. Kids have the ability to sniff out hypocrisy. They know intuitively when something is just being said and when it's being meant, truly meant instead. And if you're just speaking about it, you don't truly feel it, that will never have a full impact. When you feel it as well, and then you can talk about the beauty of Shabbos, then that's something that is profoundly transformative and does have that spillover effect to others. So piece of advice number 6 is model it. And then the final piece of advice, advice number 7, is also, again, I'd say together with number 6, perhaps the most important piece of advice, is daven for assistance. In the end of the day, we don't control our children's experience of Shabbos and whether they will love Shabbos or Rahman al-Aslan, not love Shabbos. And like everything else, it requires siyata d'shmaya. Just today, Erev Sivan is the day in which the Shloh HaKadosh designated as a special tefillah for one's children. Quoted it in source number 9. A person always needs to daven that their children will properly observe Torah and mitzvos, and all their other needs as well, anything they need in life, a proper spouse, any material needs, all of it comes from Hashem. On the eve of Chodesh Sivan, which is the month of Matan Torah, the month in which we are called Banim LaHashem Elokeinu, that is a specially designated day, says the Shloh HaKadosh, to say this special tefillah, and he composes a tefillah for us. It's a tefillah that I recited today, that my wife recited today, that many others recited as well. If you didn't, it's not too late. You could say it on Rosh Chodesh too. He says it's best. He thinks it's best to say it on Erev Rosh Chodesh. You could say it any day of the year. You could say it every day of the year. You certainly could say it, I'm giving you the heter. You could certainly say it on Rosh Chodesh Sivan as well. If you're interested, I can send you the text. It's a beautiful tefillah that needs to be recited because in the end of the day, we don't control whether our children are going to love Torah and mitzvahs. You could do everything right, and your children could go in a direction that you don't want. You could do everything wrong sometimes, and they could surprise you and surpass your expectations. Ultimately, it requires siyata d'shmaya. And on Shabbos, we lean into that. And the tefillah that is recited over the candles on Friday night, a Jewish woman davens, the bold of source number 10, Bezakenu lagado banim uvnei banim chacham unevonim oavei Hashem yirei Elokim. Give us children who are chachamim nevonim, wise children who love Hashem, going back to that theme of ahava that we discussed. Yirei Elokim, who fear Hashem, anshe emes zera kodesh b'Hashem dveikim, u'meirim es ha'olam b'torah u'ma'asim tovim u'malachas avodas haboreh. Hashem, we could do everything right. But at the end of the day, it comes down to you. Help them to love Shabbos. Help them to love mitzvahs. Help them to love you. Help them to guide them on the proper path. On Friday night, we bless our children. May you be righteous like Ephraim and Menashe, the bracha that Yaakov gave to his children, to his grandchildren, thousands of years ago. I could say personally that when I give this bracha, I use the uniform language that the rest of Klal Yisrael uses, again, the one designated by Yaakov Avinu. But I take a moment to think about each child before I give them a bracha, and to think about what are my hopes for this child, what are my concerns about this child, what is the unique bracha that I'm giving them, expressed through the very same words, but with a unique kavanah intended for each and every child. It's a tefillah to Hashem. That's ultimately what a bracha is, that He guide each of them on the path that's right for them, and that He get them to where they need to be. We can prepare all we want, we can do all the right things, but ultimately it comes down to siyata d'shmaya, and accordingly, we daven that Hashem will lead them on the proper path. So in the end of the day, there's plenty for us to do. I'm sure this is not an exhaustive list. There are plenty more things as well, but we should prepare for Shabbos. We should be ready to adapt when our plans don't come to be materialized. We should strive to make Shabbos enjoyable. We should strive to make it meaningful. We should meet our children, grandchildren, others at the level that they are at. We should model it ourselves, and we should daven for Hashem's help. When we do all of those things, may Hashem hear our tefillos, may He grant the brachos that we give our children, and open up our hearts, the hearts of Banenu, Bnei Banenu, to the beauty of Shabbos and to the beauty of Hashem's Torah in general. Shkoyach, everyone.
Amen.